Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
So lost without you. That was really terrible. But I was lost. I mean, I was on vacation. I was kind of lost in Hurricane Ernesto for a little bit there. But it's me. It's Sigmund Bloom. I'm back, and we're back. Football's back. I wasn't back last week for the first week of preseason, but I'm sitting here. We're doing the show. I'm watching some Aaron Brown up on the screen for the Cincinnati Bengals. Everything is right with the world. Part of the reason everything is right with the world is Mr. Matt Waldman is joining us. Cecil's going to be here. Cecil's is a parent meeting, I think, for Liam's team. And, of course, that is the most important football in the Lammey sphere. But, Matt, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Watching the same thing here, watching the Bungles and the Falcons and trying to figure out what we got going on here. I mean, it's, you know, if you haven't had a chance to see this particular broadcast, you're watching the Browns and Packers. You know, A.J. Green's caught a nice long touchdown in this, you know, old stomping grounds are close enough, you could say. I'm sure they had their time in the Peach Bowl here. And then, you know, you have a chance to, you know, Vontaze Burfict got into a game and then ended up promptly being helped off the field. And, you know, Falcons look good. You know, Julio Jones is actually making catches, you know, with contact impending there. That's a good sign for him because once that happens, he's going to be a monster, and he's looking pretty Frankensteinish right now.
Yeah, monstrous indeed. And that's the theme, at least while I'm in control tonight. I want to make that theme for us of revising our opinions. And this is a time of doing that. This is a time, the words that keep coming up for me, Matt, when I'm doing radio spots, talking to people, is being nimble, being agile. You can't hold tight to those views that took you months to build up in the off season whenever we see not just what we see in the preseason, what we hear out of training camp, and sometimes just intuitively you just get that feeling, like you know that this is the way things are changing. And I wanted to ask you about that because this is something that you documented very well about Julio Jones, that contested balls are not his strong suit. And we did see him, now he juggled it, but he stuck with the concentration. He made a good catch. And also it's important to point out that Matt Ryan tried to stick it in there when the coverage was pretty good on Julio Jones. Of course, Ryan went back to him deep, found him deep, and it went off of Julio's fingertips. Then he came back a couple of plays later and caught a ball down inside the 5. And as a quick aside, I want to say, hey, Roddy White still looks good, and Roddy White is still going to get his in this offense. And if I can get Roddy White around after Julio Jones, then I will. But you see it going on around the fantasy football world that Julio Jones, I think there's at least one person in every league that sees him as the next Calvin Johnson, and they're going to take him in the second round. Just accept it, folks. If you want Julio Jones, has to be a second-round pick. Are you warming to that stance? Maybe you won't be the one that does it, but do you see more reason for it now?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely see more reason for it because what you want, the only thing that really held me back in terms of looking at Julio Jones, separating my opinion, you know, separating him between, say, someone elite like A.J. Green and Julio Jones. And we actually just saw Mohamed Sanu make a leaping catch in the corner of the end zone for a touchdown here. He was all alone. Bruce Gradkowski hitting him for that. It was a nice adjustment on the football here. But you look at Julio Jones, the main thing that, to me, that separated A.J. Green is that you knew A.J. Green was going to come down with the ball in a contested situation, especially one where he knows the defender is behind him and is going to lay a pop on him when he makes the catch. And Jones, if he saw the defender coming, say, for instance, the defender was in front of him or behind him to make a hit where it was like it was tight coverage, he's going to make the catch in tight coverage. But if he knows he's going to take a hard hit, he tends to lose focus because he wants to run before he hauls the ball in. And he had issues like that last year. But so far from what we're seeing, I mean, that second pass that you were talking about, he had a safety coming up that he knew he was going to have to take a hit and get under it, and he made sure that he caught the ball first before he made the adjustment with his body to get under the hit, and that's something that he didn't do very well last year and at Alabama. So if he continues to play like that, yeah, I can see why he would be a high-end number 2 wide receiver off the board in 12-team leagues, maybe even a low-end wide receiver 1. And feel pretty good about that. I just think that, you know, everything that we've talked about, you know, in terms of Dirk Cutter and that offense and the scheme and what they're going to do all made sense. But until you see that one difference, that one thing that's going to hold him back from being that go-to guy, now that he's showing that a little bit, there's reason for optimism.
There is, and I'm not going to take Julio Jones in any draft. I'm not going to take any wide receiver in the second round. To be honest, I'm not going to take anyone in the first either, but that's just my angle. But you should know, if you're targeting Julio Jones, you better take him in the second round. And we're even seeing in the chat room, Henry Muto saying just saw him go at the 10th and 11th pick overall in the Football Guys Players Championship. And that gives me a chance to bring up the Football Guys Players Championship, because right now registration is open. And if you're listening to the show, then you got chops. You're in the top 10 or 20% of fantasy football players anywhere. So you want to step up a little bit. Maybe you don't want to put down next month's mortgage payment, but you want a shot at a big prize. You go to the registration for the Football Guys Players Championship. It's leagues.myffpc.com/footballguys, and you will get a shot at the $150,000 first prize. It's the high-stakes contest with the medium-stakes entry fee of only $350, or you can get 3 teams for $1,000. The entire prize pool is fully guaranteed, placed in a secured attorney escrow account, no shenanigans. It will remain there for the duration of the season, and everyone will get their prizes by January 28th. So if you're ready to move up a little bit, Football Guys Players Championship. It's got the Football Guys name. You can trust it. Now, you can trust Matt Waldman. And what I want to ask you, Matt, and this is, again, getting back to that idea of revising, we're doing drafts. We're in some of the same drafts right now. I would say that almost everyone that does what we do has 2-3 drafts going on simultaneously, including live drafts. And who are the players that you're catching yourself now that, compared to a week or two ago, you're approaching them differently? Maybe you're letting them fall farther. Maybe you're targeting them earlier. Maybe you're just giving them a look when you weren't even thinking about them before. Give me a couple of names that you realize, like, wow, I'm really updating my view of him as these drafts are going on.
Well, I think one guy is who I've passed a couple of times, and I'm still kind of back and forth about it, is Brandon Marshall. I've had him as my number 2 wide receiver on the board, and while I still look at him as a top 5 guy, I found myself inching Brandon Lloyd a little bit further up because I wanted to make sure I got him. Now, part of that is in the 2 leagues that we're drafting in right now, these IOP leagues. I just kind of like, I've either had Tom Brady or I've liked the idea of having a big play guy for the scoring system, and somebody who's going to give me both the combination of big plays and receptions. And I know that, Marshall can be a reception machine, but for some reason I'm just looking at those 2, and I'm finding myself being a little bit lower on Marshall than I thought I would be. I found myself also looking at some quarterbacks in these types of leagues a little bit more than I would have imagined earlier. And then I think that probably somebody who I really didn't imagine taking, but felt like I was getting a decent deal, was actually Frank Gore, like in the mid rounds when he drops as far as he does. It just seems to me that you look at this situation, and maybe he's not Steven Jackson because Steven Jackson hasn't lost a step like Gore has, but I look at LaDainian Tomlinson 2 years ago when he had that really nice, season, probably his last hurrah season for the Jets. And it seems to me that there's a very good, indication that Gore could have that type of a season for San Francisco this year. And, I mean, it just seems, you look at Kendall Hunter, certainly talented. Brandon Jacobs is capable of being a committee back there, and you're going to have a Michael James with his big play ability. But putting that all together, to me, it just still seems like Gore, and Michael Turner, 2 guys who, were predicting the end of their reign as, 300 carry guys, but it doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to drop down to 150.
Yeah, and I think that where you need to understand your stance on a Gore or a Michael Turner, and Michael Turner, really quickly watching Atlanta tonight, you see that it's all going to converge at Matt Ryan. It's not going to be a 300 carry season for Michael Turner. But then you can tell another story and say, well, hey, if they just give Turner the carries inside the 5 and he can just get 12 or 14 rushing touchdowns, he may still justify a pick in the 5th round. But where you need to know, because the way I see it, you want to be taking a wide receiver in the 5th round. If you're looking at the wide receivers on the board in the 5th round, in any scenario, you're going to be sad if you feel hemmed in to taking a Frank Gore or a Michael Turner. That being said, if you go with an upside-down strategy and you, say, lead off with a Graham Breeze start, or, you just feel like Calvin Johnson and Julio Jones are so clearly going to be the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers that you want to take them to start off your draft, and you're going to need to dig for running backs in the mid-rounds. I think Gore and Turner might present some value there. And as we see, someone like Isaac Redmond we'll talk about with Dr. Jean being a little banged up, I can see more of an argument for them. I think we're seeing a lot of things in motion, a lot of them having to do with injuries. And again, we'll talk to Dr. Jean about some of these big injuries, and it's changing the landscape at running back as we speak. And not just injuries, but just things that we're learning about players. But also we're seeing a lot of these situations being very fluid. I know something about football is asking me about Roy Hulu in the chat room. We have his question in the Shark Pool coming up, the thread, and we'll talk about this Washington situation. Perhaps I haven't revised him down quite far enough. I haven't had that moment yet in one of my drafts in the 9th or 10th round to see him still on the board and really put it to the test of whether I believe in the ranking of him somewhere in that range. Another one that we've seen a little bit of change in is the New England Patriots. Stephen Ridley, if you remember last year, got benched after some fumble problems. The word is he had some fumble problems again earlier this week. Mike Reese, there is no more trusted voice on all things Patriots than Mike Reese said. Shane Vereen is gaining ground on Ridley and getting a lot more first-team reps. And we can go back and talk about Vereen at Cal and the great talent he has, really. And let's face it, with Tom Brady and all those weapons, you don't need to be that talented of a running back to be productive. So I ask you, Matt, where maybe Stephen Ridley seemed like a value in the 8th or 9th round, Shane Vereen seemed like someone you may throw your last pick at. Are they moving closer on your board? Or do you maybe at this point just kind of shrug your shoulders and say, yeah, I'm going to let someone else, because this is how I feel about Green Bay, I'm going to let somebody else take a running back. I'm just not even going to bother with a running back. You think New England, there could be some fertile ground there?
I think with New England, you certainly can get some decent running back play out of that. I wouldn't be surprised, just because here's a team that seems to be flexible with what they do. 1 year, Wes Welker isn't maybe catching as many passes. You're getting more from the tight ends. They adjust to what's going on with their talent. And frankly, they just really haven't had a lot of talent at running back when it comes to a full-fledged guy since the potential that Lawrence Maroney had, and then he failed to live up to it. So when I look at this situation, certainly Ridley has the potential to be, I think, a low-end committee running back in terms of low-end fantasy committee running back, a guy like a high-end wide running back 3 at best for you. That's how I look at him in terms of talent, if you put everybody playing to their potential. I think Shane Vereen's the bigger talent. I think that Vereen could be could have a better career if you were able to, even if Javid Best were healthy, I think he has the potential to have a better career than Best, because I think he's a better inside runner in terms of his physicality, his balance. Javid Best is a wonderful football player with great vision, and if he were able to stay healthy and get healthy enough to get on the field, it would be a close call. But the fact that I'm saying that Vereen would make it a closer call than you think, says a lot about what he can do. To me, when you apply all that to fantasy drafts, the thing with Vereen is that he can catch the football. He's very good at that. He can kind of take the place of both Ridley and Woodhead as one player, and that just makes the offense more versatile, more multiple in what they can do, and that key word, multiple, is what the Patriots like to be on offense and defense. So when you look at this, if you can get Shane Vereen after round 12 in a draft, then yeah, you take him, because he presents that upside value. Anybody after round 12 in most drafts, when you look at, you're looking at them based on potential and talent, not so much as whether or not they're going to get all the carries, because it's at that point you don't want to try and guess and project that and overanalyze it to the point that you talk yourself out of a good player and the situation changes. It's like not taking 2-3 years ago Mike Williams at the end of the draft because you look at that team and say, well, they had Golden Tate and he's going to possibly get some time, and they're bringing in this guy and this, you can overanalyze it to death, but if Mike Williams were healthy, he's in shape for the first time in his career, you take a chance on him, even if he's, eating himself out of the league before that. If you look at him and you knew what his talent was and what he was capable of, you let the chips fall where they may that late. And I think that's the case with somebody like Vereen. So yeah, anywhere after round 12, go for it.
Now I want you to talk a little bit about how revising, again, the buzzword here this week, talk about how you've revised your view on Randy Moss, because we saw some reports out of San Francisco that speculated that he may only get 20 or 25 snaps a game. And then Mike Sando, certainly a very trusted voice on everything NFC West from ESPN, he confirmed that as, this isn't just something that we're totally speculating or making it up. I know that I saw a comment from you, Matt, that it is changing your approach to valuing Moss. And hey, if there's anybody who can make it happen on 20 or 25 snaps, it could be Randy Moss. But still, we've got to be realistic at this time of year. What's the realistic take on Moss now?
I think the realistic take on Moss is that they're giving him that 20 to 25 snap count. Let's look beyond the facts that were stated or reported here, but let's try and speculate on the why. And the first one would be, well, the logical thing. He's old. He hasn't played in over a year. We don't want him to get hurt, and then suddenly he's going to end up, on the bench frustrated and no good to us for a long part of the season with some sort of muscle issue that never gets better. So that's the main reason there. But I think what you can look at as the best case scenario is they're going to put him on the snap count. They're going to see how he does for the first 4 games, maybe the first 6 games, maybe even the first half of the season. And if he continues to play well, doesn't get hurt, is able to stay healthy and produce, then I could see them gradually increasing that snap count to feeling like that they would put no restrictions on him. And that way, then you're seeing a guy who could end up having a big stretch run for you as a player, as, a wide receiver 3, maybe even a wide receiver 2. But yeah, I think the safe bet here is to look at him as probably your 5th, 6th, 7th receiver, at the, after the 10th round probably, with a ton of upside, and hoping that you can use him as a flex play. But I think that's the thing you have to speculate is a little bit as to the why. It's not because the skills are bad. It's just because I think they want to make sure that they don't ruin them before they even get them started.
No, you brought up Javid Best, and it's now something that Dr. Jean was telling us months ago is now becoming common knowledge that he's not going to be cleared, at least not very soon, and nobody can say for sure when he will be cleared. It's becoming the conventionalism that he'll start the year on the PUP. And now we're looking at an entirely different landscape of the Detroit backfield. And obviously in the crosshairs is Kevin Smith, who looked very impressive last year, but also barely stayed on the field for a blink of an eye before getting hurt. I know there's some reports that he's in great shape, looking good, healthy, and so on. And Matt, I know that you were very high on Kevin Smith, and we butted heads a little bit on Kevin Smith, and I can't say that I was right about him because actually he ran a lot tougher in the NFL than I thought he would, and really it just seemed like he was a candle burning at both ends physically, but now maybe he gets a second shot at it. So what's your advice to people who are drafting this weekend? Should they be targeting Smith? And what's that sweet spot where you can get him at about the latest point you should still be able to get him in a draft where, people are somewhat in the know? I mean, maybe not sharks, but, what's the round that you should be targeting Kevin Smith if you think people should be? Matt?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm just actually thinking about, I think it was I almost had one of those Kevin Smith-like injuries there before I even got on the air here. But really, I mean, looking at Smith right now, I mean, there's a couple things to think about here. We just heard in the news about the Jaguars, about the Jaguars coaching staff, Mike Mularkey, warning Maurice Jones-Drew that there's nothing like being in practice and playing in the preseason to get into football shape. You can't do that any other way. I don't care how good a shape you're in. That was basically his statement. Now, we know that there's some posturing there to get him into camp and try and scare him into, trying to come to some sort of agreement here. But there is some truth to that because, again, I'm sure there's somebody else that we can mention, but I bring this up, it seems like every week. Emmitt Smith's the only running back I remember who held out until the season started, stayed healthy, and actually performed as well or better than expectations. And as great as Maurice Jones-Drew is, and as much as we love him as a football player and a competitor, the odds are against him just looking at it from that angle. So Kevin Smith, looking at last year, hadn't played for for over a year and was sitting on a couch, even though he was working out hard and he was in great shape according to his trainer. He wasn't in football shape, and as a result, one small injury after another that kept him from being able to finish games. I think that part of the thing, too, is you can look at, he does have a very hard slashing, cutting style, and some of those backs can have some issues as a result of that, too, especially playing on a hard surface. But I think that looking at Smith overall, you kind of have to give him the benefit of the doubt. If you're going to give somebody like Darren McFadden the benefit of the doubt that he's going to be able to stay healthy and you're going to draft him as high as people do because of his upside, well, you got to look at the fact that Kevin Smith right now is ADP's, in the middle of the 7th round. Best. We don't know when he's coming. And then you have Mikel LaSure, who's going to miss games with his suspension and the fact that he's coming back from the Achilles injury. Kevin Smith, this is his job to lose, really. I mean, so when you look at that, to me, Kevin Smith is oftentimes falling to the mid-9th round. I think that if you can get him somewhere in the 8th round, you're feeling pretty good about that at this point. If at that stage, you're looking at guys. If you have a quarterback already, then you're probably not going to be taking Griffin or Cutler unless because those guys are really your lead quarterbacks in a committee situation. You're also comparing Smith in that range to, did he fall to a point where people took C.J. Spiller and Mark Ingram beforehand, Jonathan Stewart? And to me, it's comparing Smith and Cedric Benson and Roy Halou, or even David Wilson and LeGarrette Blount. All those guys are committee situations with maybe a little bit higher upside if they earn the position, but they're also with coaches that are likely to play kind of a carousel with their running back situation. So to me, Smith in round 8 is a good spot for him. And if you feel like you have to reach a little bit to get him, and when I say reach is actually just get him at his ADP in the mid-7th round, I'd still feel good with that.
Yeah, I would too. If Peyton Hillis was still on the board, I'd probably say go with Hillis. But like you said, looking at the names beside Kevin Smith on the ADP, it's an easy call in the 8th, and certainly one that you take in the 7th, and especially if you do something like start out your draft with Adrian Peterson or Ryan Matthews or Trent Richardson as one of your first 2 running backs, and you think you're going to need somebody to maybe put that running back 2 production from your running back 3 spot early. If those guys start slow, then Kevin Smith is a perfect candidate for that. So Kevin Smith has outlasted the competition there, really. And then the question is, as we talked about, Joyce Bell. Also, got to mention Keelan Williams has looked good in the preseason. And I like Keelan Williams, at least from a pure talent standpoint, back at LSU. And really in Detroit, any competent running back is going to find running lanes and be productive. So we've got to watch whoever they keep up there. Now, before we get to the Diggy Doc, Matt, I've got to ask you something that really kind of blindsided me, but I did react to it in my rankings. I did revise my feelings about Maurice Jones-Drew. You brought him up. And we're lucky to be active in Twitter, that robust football community, and we get to know a lot of people who make it their business to know everything about one team, everything about the personnel, everything about the coaches, everything about the way the winds are blowing. And Alfie Crow is certainly one of those people that I trust when it comes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And we've been talking about Maurice Jones-Drew in the preseason, in the summer, as a player maybe you were worried about because of the holdout. But my stance has always been, well, he's not really going to hold out into the season. I think he's going to show up in a week or two at the most. And he's Maurice Jones-Drew. I mean, he barely played last preseason, barely was an active part of the offense, and led the league in rushing and arguably the worst passing game in the league. So I think I trust him despite the questions about the holdout. And I've been keeping him in my late first-round top 7 running backs. But talking to Alfie this week, he said, really the Jaguars are just going about business as usual with Rashad Jennings as the starter, and they like Rashad Jennings. And he said very matter-of-factly that Maurice Jones-Drew isn't going to get 300 carries this year. He estimated it about 250 for Maurice Jones-Drew and 150 for Rashad Jennings, going back to the kind of split that we saw when Fred Taylor and Maurice Jones-Drew were splitting carries. And the more I thought about it, the more believable it sounded, simply because he hasn't been there. You send a message to your players anyway. I mean, it's smart anyway to preserve the players, but you send a message that, hey, you're not going to be here, or then you're not going to reward you with a big workload, not to mention that Rashad Jennings has been looking good and has deserved that 1A kind of role. So I'm now afraid of taking Maurice Jones-Drew any earlier than the mid to late third round. Does this pass the sniff test for you, Matt? Do you think this is something that we should be incorporating into our Maurice Jones-Drew fantasy stock?
Actually, I do, Bloom. I think that it is something that we should incorporate into it, because you have to remember that Jones-Drew, I mean, looking at where he is in his career, we're talking about a guy who, has played, already we're looking at 6 seasons. He's already on his 7th season in the league. That's a good bit of mileage on him, and he just, you're looking at a guy who had 343 carries. I mean, really looking at probably his best season. This is from a yardage and carry standpoint. I don't see how he could even come close to that again. I think that last year could arguably be his peak season, and it was on a season where he wasn't fully healthy to begin the year. This is and when you're talking about that knee and kind of grinning and bearing it, you're starting to look at you start thinking of guys like Curtis Martin and guys who were extremely tough and competitive, and maybe he plays another 3 to 4 years and provides. And can still carry the ball 250 times, 270 times. But I'm not really buying that. I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that if they have a healthy guy like Rashad Jennings, there is no other team. There's no other position in the NFL where teams are less sentimental about a player. And they are ready to, basically change that cog as soon as they see any type of evidence to do so. And yes, he had a great yards per carry last season, but I think that they look at it and they feel like, let's ease him in. Let's use Rashad Jennings, make sure that Jones-Drew doesn't get hurt. We start winning some games, start looking good, and it feels like that, maybe Jennings has a little bit of drop-off, then we can ease Drew back in there. But if it works well, we've got, we can look to our division rival, the Texans, and see that Arian Foster and, Ben Tate seem to do pretty good in a rotation. And, we could possibly do the same thing with these two backs. So, I think there's something there to consider. It doesn't make me want to go way up to grab Rashad Jennings at this point. But it's certainly something worthwhile to consider and to lower Maurice Jones-Drew's expectations enough to where he's not an automatic first-round guy. And because of the fact people are worried about all these things with him, with the with the negotiation and everything like that, it's worthwhile to wait for him for the 3rd, 4th, maybe even the 5th round, depending on the style of league that you're in.
Yeah, and I agree with that point. I want to call attention to that again, that don't rush to get Rashad Jennings. I saw someone in the chat room say he went in the 7th round on a draft. No. Maurice Jones-Drew is good. Maurice Jones-Drew is durable. Rashad Jennings is going to be a 1A back for a team that probably won't win more than 6 or 7 games this year. So we like Rashad Jennings in dynasty leagues. You better be holding on to Rashad Jennings. But in redraft leagues, not as excited. It's more his effect on Maurice Jones-Drew's stock. Now, we are even a little overdue for our appointment with a doctor, but I do want to remind everybody about the Football Guys Players Championship. It has the Football Guys name, so you know it's something you want to be a part of. You listen to this show, you've built up your muscle in the fantasy football world, you're ready to step up, get a high-stakes contest prize of $150,000 for only a $350 entry fee, or you can get 3 teams for $1,000, try some alternate strategies, and the entire prize pool is fully guaranteed, placed in escrow, everything's paid out before January 28th of 2013, before the Super Bowl. So you can go to Vegas and put everything you win on the Super Bowl. No, don't do that. But do join the Football Guys Players Championship, and do sit down and turn your head and cough for the doctor.
I think it's time to let them know who you are. I'm the diggy doctor, pumping it, yes, y'all. DOC on necessity, kicking fresh, y'all. Letting the bass go and flow with those so I can play. Leaving the rest of DJ Dr. Dre. It's the diggy
The diggy doc and doc. I mean, we can't get into much small talk here because we've got a lot going on, but how are you today? Oh, wait, you know what I need to do to get the doc in here? I need to do this. This is why I shouldn't be. Now we have the doc. Now are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I faked you out. My switchboard controls are not up to Lammey standards, but I'm working on it. So, yeah, we've got a lot to talk about, but I know that you're going to be ready with all the answers for us, but just, how are you doing before we start picking your brain?
I'm doing well. One thing I'm not going to be doing is putting together a mobile hernia check van. This isn't going to be a mammography 2-for-1 deal for the football guys out there.
Right.
So.
Right. I know exactly how it is, too. I know exactly what it is, too, because you're afraid that after you ask someone to turn their head and cough, they'll say, okay, doc, now it's my turn. Now, let's go ahead and jump in. We've got a lot of, and you turn your head and cough. Lots of stuff to talk about. Wow. Let's start with Ryan Matthews, because I know that you have been one of the voices of caution about the real timetable, but you've also been an optimistic voice saying, even with that in mind, I'm taking Matthews in the 3rd round. And there was just a report on NFL. It's really very much like yourself, Gene, someone who's a team doctor for the White Sox, I think for the Chicago Bulls, saying, look, this is what it takes, 8.8 weeks on average, 6 weeks is really the minimum. He's saying, potentially October. From the outside looking in now, some people took that and ran with that and said, he won't be back until October. That's not what that doctor was saying. He was just saying, based on my experience, this is what I think people need to be open to. So slay it out for everybody, because really what you're looking at here is the likelihood of getting a 70 to 85% of the regular season running back one, and we have to have a somewhat inexact science here of judging what that is worth in a fantasy draft.
Yeah, I think the first thing is just to try to navigate the waters on what we're hearing. Immediately after the injury, Norv Turner was telling us 4 to 6 weeks. That seemed a little bit optimistic, although folks have pointed to Marquez Colson's very quick, and he was cleared for contact 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks after his surgery last year, pointing to Marquez Colson as, maybe the 4 to 6 week estimate is too conservative from Norv Turner. And then today, I think that the headline that NFL.com used saying that Matthews wasn't going to be back until October, if you go back and look at that clip from the orthopedic surgeon, he doesn't specifically say that. He does make reference to a study that showed NFL athletes on average come back from a collarbone injury, a collarbone fracture, and surgical procedure in 8.8 weeks. Close to 9 weeks, and that would certainly put him into week 4, week 5, but he didn't specifically say that that was likely to happen with Matthews. What he said was pretty similar to what I've been saying, and what I think is probably a reasonable expectation is somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks. It's going to take 5 to 6 weeks for that bone to heal. You would expect that certainly Marquez Colston going over the middle and running down the field is going to take a number of hits to that area, but they're likely to be a little bit more cautious with a running back. They're going to allow that bone to heal fully, and then he's going to be able to run pretty comfortably after a week or so. I don't expect there to be any conditioning issues, but they're going to hold him out until they're pretty certain that that bone and that surgical area is going to heal up. So for fantasy purposes, what do? I think there doesn't really seem to be any gray area in all the arguments and discussion that have gone on Twitter and message boards and everywhere else over the past few days related to Ryan Matthews. Either folks had seen him as a China doll in shoulder pads and weren't going to be drafting him anyway. They didn't see him as a top 5 back, and now they have more than enough ammunition to say he's a 5th, 6th round player. He's not even in my top 20. I think that's probably going a little bit too far, but the other stretch is people want to believe that he'll be back in 4 to 5 weeks, maybe only miss a week or so, and those that thought that he was a top 5 player anyway are still seeing him as a bargain in the 2nd round. I'm a little bit closer to that because I was buying in on Ryan Matthews to begin with, but I think that 8 weeks is certainly possible. There's a chance that he's not fully healed in 6 weeks, and they give him the benefit of the doubt of another week or two. So I think, North Turner may say 4 to 6 weeks. That may end up being what we're seeing. But if you're buying in, if you're betting on Ryan Matthews, if you're hoping that he comes back a little bit sooner, I wouldn't fear that prolonged estimate. If he ends up being out 7 or 8 weeks, that's an extra week or two for him to heal. That doesn't necessarily mean he's a slow healer. It may mean that he's going to get the benefit of the doubt and have that much less chance of injury when he does come back.
Well, Gene, I just watched Marvin Jones do what we've seen him do all the Senior Bowl, which was make a long catch in tight coverage in the third quarter of this game. But you brought up something when you came on about turning your head and cough that I just, unfortunately, have to bring, use that as a segue to talk about, have you talk about Isaac Redman's groin, So if you can talk a little bit about that and, what you see from a fantasy standpoint, whether or not this opens the door for, Jonathan Dwyer.
I think even without the groin injury, there was a chance that Jonathan Dwyer, who's had some minor injury issues of his own, may have had a little bit of a crack in the door that he could have taken advantage of. Redman's issue, it's kind of hard to get to the bottom of. He had a little bit of a groin thing, came back, worse, tried to come back again, then had what was called a hip issue. All of these things are probably related, but it's hard to tell. The way it was described on Twitter was that he just went down in a heap, didn't want to get up, and then needed an MRI. And then today, what we're hearing is that nobody's going to give us any information about the MRI. I don't think Mike Tomlin even wanted to say that he had an MRI. But Redman was willing to say that, he thinks he's going to be back in a couple of days. The one thing we know about muscle strains, whether they be groin, hamstring, quad, whatever, calf, is that if you come back a little bit too soon before it's fully healed and you aggravate that injury, it's not a guarantee that you'll aggravate the injury, but if you do, the chances that it's at least as bad as it was before, if not worse, are pretty high. And that risk extends probably, based on the study, 7 days, 14 days. The sooner you injure it, the more likely it is to be worse. But Redman has gone through that cascade a couple of times now. So he may say that he thinks he's going to be back early next week, but it would not surprise me for the team, if they think Redman is the man, to hold him out a little bit longer. Now, if we see Redman push it again so soon after coming off the field a couple of times, then that's probably more information to suggest that Dwyer's on his heels, that a couple of the other players may be on his heels in terms of a committee situation, and that the team wants Redman to get out there and play through it, and or Redman feels like he needs to be out there to continue to compete. So there's lots of different ways this could go by the beginning of next week. I don't think we're likely to see him on the field until next week. To be honest with you, until we see exactly how he produces on the field and where he is on the depth chart and what he looks like in a preseason game, I'm not sure we're going to know exactly what the status of his groin is and exactly what the status of his competition with Jonathan Dwyer may be.
And I've moved him down from the 5th round to the 7th round to the bottom of the tier, which gives me a chance to mention that Gene and my annual collaboration on tiers came out this week for Football Guy subscribers. Also, the first edition of the IDP Roundtable for IDP crowd out there with Gene and the guru John Norton and myself at the controls. That just hit the presses this morning, and we're still doing the beat writer tour too. Cecil had Charlie Campbell from Walter Football. He had Bob Fesco from AM 610 in Kansas City, and Derek Togerson from NBC7 in San Diego. So you're getting a great dose of beat writers. I also interviewed George Bremer from the Anderson Herald Bulletin, who covers the Colts. and that one should be coming out tomorrow. So lots of good stuff on the Audible. Right now we're talking medical situations with Dr. Gene Bramwell, and another big one this week. It's a big week, big day yesterday for medical news. Jason Witten, and this one started out as a rumor, and rumor became reality very quickly. Injury to his spleen, slight laceration. Sorry, it's kind of giving me a slight heart attack. So, what's the bottom line here? Because Jason Witten was a player that, frankly, I was starting to talk myself into liking. No number 3 receiver, really good tackles now there in Dallas, so he was going to be able to get out into patterns more. Maybe even somebody who, by necessity, gets the red zone targets that Robinson got last year, falling to the 6th, 7th round in drafts. It's somewhat a situation like Matthews, where we can't really say when he'll play his first game, and we can't necessarily say if he's even going to have surgery at this point. So what do you advise?
Well, first, even though the trauma surgeons will grade splenic lacerations on a curve from 1 to 5, there really is no such thing as a slight spleen laceration.
Right.
Certainly there's grades of severity there, but the reason there you need to be just as concerned about a 1 or a 2, which is probably where Witten is, versus a 4 or 5, which would have gotten him in surgery immediately, is that even those minor spleen lacerations have a reasonable risk, somewhere between 5 and 10%, of rupturing. The spleen is essentially a big bag of blood, and there's a fibrous capsule that goes all the way around it. And grade 2 lacerations can sometimes, well, they don't sometimes, they do by definition involve that capsule. And as the spleen swells with the bleeding and it stretches the capsule a little bit, there's some inflammation that happens. The capsule can break down any further, and that laceration can extend and then rupture the spleen. And if that happens, especially near a blood vessel, that's a big deal. So that's why they're asking him pretty much to do nothing of these next 7 to 10 days. That delayed risk of splenic rupture is highest in the first 2 or 3 days, but it extends all the way out to 10 to 14 days. So he's not going to be doing anything at all for the next couple of weeks, where they observe him pretty closely, hope he doesn't have any symptoms, hope that they decide that they don't need to do any other surgical procedures. Now, one of the surgical procedures that may be on the table, it's not exactly surgery, but it is a little bit of an invasive procedure, would be something called embolization, where they'd go in and try to artificially clot off any of the vessels that may still be bleeding. So that may be on the table as well. The issue with Witten is they are not going to clear him for contact until they can see definitively that that blood is gone and that the capsule is healed. They're just not going to put him in a situation where a minor hit might tear that thing open and cause him a lot of trouble in a very short period of time. And there's really no consensus, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, on exactly when to expect that to happen on average. And we talked about what on average means with Ryan Matthews' issue. On average, a minor spleen laceration is considered low risk after about 14 days, but there's a period of time there where everybody heals a little bit differently, the capsule heals differently, the blood resorbs a little bit more quickly or more slowly. It may be 4, 5, 6 weeks before he's even close to a situation where they'll clear him for contact, and even though he may have done some light running and some minor activity before that point, it's certainly possible that we could see 4 to 6, we could see 6 to 8. If he has any complications in this period or in the period that comes after this, it could stretch on a little bit longer. I think the Cowboys have a bye in week 5. I think it's likely that we may not see him until after that, just based on safety issues. Now, it's possible that he could have a very quick healing process. Didn't sound like he was in the hospital. Maybe he's just got a grade 1 laceration that's going to heal pretty quickly. But I think I would expect him to miss 4 games at this point and be happy if I owned him at a dynasty league that he came back a little bit sooner. As far as what to do, at least in my tiers, I don't think I'd consider him until after that Jermichael Finley, Fred Davis area, so he's probably down in that 7, 8, 9 range for me. Around that time, this is a situation where once they clear him to come back, he should be fine. If they've cleared him, you can assume that he's not going to have any issues with the spleen. There's going to be a concern for conditioning injuries, as we always talk about, but once he comes back, he should be fine, and we know that he's got good chemistry with Romo. So, missing 4 games, discount him as much as you'd like there, but I think I'd still consider him alongside guys like Pettigrew, Gonzalez, Tammy, Selleck, in that sort of tier there.
Gene, let's do our weekly Adrian Peterson watch. and now he's running and participating in drills, and we've had the famous don't touch him or you're cut rule that Leslie Frazier is supposedly imposed on the Vikings here, and I'm sure that Peterson is probably daring these guys to touch him, and wanting them to. So tell me a little bit, about what you're hearing here. I would imagine it's going to be the same as it ever was until we see him, have to make some really dynamic cuts and deal with contact. That he's, that it's the same type of deal. Wait and see. But I mean, I'm certainly seeing people suddenly, make revisions with what, where their standing was with taking Peterson now that he's participating in practice. So I'm wondering if you're making that revision as well, and if you could name a few guys as that you were making revisions on as you're doing drafts.
Well, I think this is not unexpected. We've been saying that Peterson's rehab has gone better than expected, but better than expected is still where he is now. I think it's unusual for him to be putting on the pads and bust through between the tackles and have those guys be told not to touch him. He also mentioned in an interview today, apparently in a local radio station, that they've asked him not to cut as well. So he's clearly not, he may feel like he's close to being all the way back, but the medical staff doesn't trust it yet. He may not fully trust it yet. And this is really the next step for him. He can run up hills and he can cut in isolation, but when he does those things, within reason, he doesn't know exactly how his body's going to behave with every step he races up a hill, but he knows about where he's going. His body is not being asked to make very quick reactions and decisions, and until he gets hit or he knows he's going to get hit, he's really not taken that last and final step to be getting prepared to go. So the longer this goes on, the more likely it is that we're going to see a whole lot of Toby Gerhart, the more likely it is that we're not going to have the true Adrian Peterson bulldozing lateral agility stud running back that we've seen over the past couple of years for some period of time into the regular season. And we've seen what a difference 2 or 3 months makes when we see how Jamal Charles has behaved. He's not had any restrictions in camp. He's not had any major setbacks or even minor setbacks as they take him through the camp process, getting him ready for the season. So those, even though it seems like just a matter of weeks, those are very important weeks for Peterson. And this is a difficult time for his team to give him the true reps that he needs to come back. Have I revised my expectation for him? No, not necessarily. I had him relatively low in kind of an upside with risk tier in that mid-teens to begin with. I didn't have him as low as some others had him, and I think, Matt, you're included in that, kind of in the 20 to 25 range. I don't think that I'd dial him back necessarily with what's going on at camp because, again, I think this is expected. But I'm not ready to push him up into that clear running back 1 tier either. Generally, he and guys like Trent Richardson have still been going a little bit higher than I would take him. Not necessarily having much to do with the injury, just because of the totality of the circumstances. As far as other guys, I'm dialing back a little bit. I think it's not necessarily injury that has me doing that. I think just as we see things progress and camp battles and that sort of stuff move along, I think we talked about Isaac Redman. I've been yo-yoing on Stephen Ridley pretty consistently. He and Shane Vereen seem to flip-flop for me on a daily basis, depending on what we're hearing going on in camp. And if the rumors of a little bit of a knee issue with Ridley allows Vereen to get still more snaps, I know all three of us liked his talents enough to expect that Vereen can probably handle that role. And we know that Belichick is going to ride whoever is playing the best. On the wide receiver side, I think some of the things that we may talk about with Peyton Manning and his comments about his arm have me rethinking Demaryius Thomas being a full tier ahead of Eric Decker. Decker is more of a possession type receiver, probably a little bit higher in my estimation at this point. You guys spoke about Julio Jones a little bit earlier in the show, and I still have a hard time thinking that Roddy White isn't going to be an effective wide receiver 1 this year, but it's really hard not to be moving Jones up as he continues to look a little bit more comfortable. Other guys, we talked a little bit about Witten. Antonio Gates is a guy that I've been pushing further up my board. He's always been in that 3-4 range to me, but he's almost getting in a mini tier by himself at this point now that we continue to hear about how well he's doing in camp and how nice his conditioning is. I still don't think I'd go so far as to suggest that he's on the heels of Graham and Gronkowski as a truly elite tight end 1 that you might consider in the 1st or 2nd round. But I think he's definitely separating himself from the rest of that Vernon Davis or Michael Finley and where Jason Witten was before.
Now, Gene mentioned it very quickly in passing, but yet Boston Herald, among other sources, reporting that Stephen Ridley had some sort of knee injury. No word on severity, no word on time he might miss, but the trend seems to be pushing in Shane Vereen's direction more and more every day. Now, another thing to talk about here, Gene, and this is one where you might just tell me that I'm Chicken Little, because Greg Jennings, nobody really took note of this. He had a concussion in a team scrimmage back on August 3rd. If it was June 3rd, it really would be news. August 3rd, 2 weeks ago, basically. Still not cleared to practice. Is going team meetings and things like that, but there's even some word out of Green Bay that it just sounds like there's some frustration there, some disappointment. And I'm thinking next concussion for Greg Jennings may be one that sidelines him for a long period, maybe for the rest of the year. Am I being over careful here? Am I getting into, head injury hysteria, or is this something you think that is well-founded?
Probably somewhere in between. I wouldn't say that it's hysteria. Certainly if he's, there's no reason for them to attempt to hold him out a little bit longer without good reason. If he's got, even if it's minor symptoms, if he still gets a little bit of headache with exercise, or he's got some light sensitivity, or who knows, any of other minor neurologic symptoms that may keep him from being cleared for contact, that may not be a huge issue. But I would think at this point of camp, if he was able to go, they'd let him go. And since it's been a couple of weeks, you have to start to wonder, this isn't a job at best situation, but the parallel is there. The longer a minor major concussion goes with there still being symptoms, the longer the timetable you should at least consider them to come back. It's not, if it takes longer than 48 hours, longer than 72 hours, longer than 2 weeks, there's no reliable way to say that the light switch changes the day after and that he's going to suddenly be cleared to go. But by the same token, I think there is some reason to expect them not necessarily to push the situation with him. Greg Jennings knows what's going on in the offense. He knows where he's supposed to be. There's no sense in necessarily getting him out there if there's any concern at all before he's fully ready. If this lingers through next week and the third week of preseason games, then I think there's some reason to be concerned about whether or not he may be ready for the regular season. And again, there's all sorts of controversy and discussion about how the next concussion will be handled, but you would think that they would handle the second one the same way they would have the first one. And it doesn't necessarily, even a minor or no matter how hard he's hit, it doesn't necessarily mean that the symptoms are going to last that long the next time. It would make you worry, and they'll certainly be a little bit more cautious with him. But I think as cautious as they've been with this one, if they clear him to come back, as we've talked about with Collie and other guys in the past, I think I'd be comfortable leaving him where he was on my draft board if all systems are go by opening weekend.
Gene, I'd like to know a little bit more about Denarius Moore. Certainly we're seeing, the nagging hamstring issues pop up once again. Tell us how you're viewing him at this point. I mean, he's a football guy's favorite in terms of the Audible. Lots of potential here, but, it seems to be a loaded wide receiver core as well. How do you, from what you're seeing, the way that the Raiders are approaching this, how do you rank Denarius Moore at this stage?
What next week is going to be a big week for Denarius Moore as well. He's another one of those guys that had a known hamstring injury, came back, and in those first 2 or 3 days of practice re-injured the same hamstring and has been out for an extended period of time. And we're going on close to 3 weeks at this point. If it extends through next week, it will be 3 weeks, and if he's not ready to go in 3 weeks, you have to start wondering if it's a grade 2, grade 3 injury, and that 2 to 4 week time frame could suddenly become 4 to 8, and he may end up missing a couple of weeks into the season. Again, hopefully this is a situation where they're just being cautious with him. They know they want him in the lineup, and there's no sense in pushing him so early in camp. But a lot of teams use that third preseason game as a dress rehearsal. You don't like to put a line in the sand here. He may be able to come back for week 4 and get the same amount of work in to get him conditioned for the season. But the longer this goes, again, in that 1 to 2 week period after he comes back from this hamstring injury, that's a time where you have to be concerned about him. I'd really like to see him, now that this has lasted 2-3 weeks, come back, get through a number of consecutive practices in a row, get through a week or two of practice in a row without any setbacks before I trust him in that same tier we had him. And I think I had him pretty similar to where Bloom did for sure. I'm not sure about you, Matt, in that kind of upside wide receiver 3 tier where he could have wide receiver 1 numbers in any week and maybe a number of weeks, but there's going to be some volatility there because of the type of player he is. I don't think I trust him as my wide receiver 3 yet. I won't be drafting him as my wide receiver 3 until I see that he can handle practice for at least a week.
Gene, just to piggyback on that Denarius Moore question, really quick touch on Miles Austin under the same kind of idea. But who I really want you to get into right now is Roy Halou, because he said he has Achilles tendonitis. He was actually very frank about it. He said it's something he's had before. This is the most extreme case of it he's had. He talked about how he's done stretching after work but not before, and maybe he needs to be doing that. He also called himself a quote-unquote naturally tight person. And after talking about Halou and the effect on his fantasy stock and Royster and so on, I want you to talk about that in the context of injury-prone, because that seems to be one of the big debates in fantasy football right now, is are there such a thing as an injury-prone player? And when someone like Roy Halou says he's naturally tight, that sets off the bell to me of that's injury-prone. So real quick, Miles Austin on the hamstrings, Roy Halou, and then this larger issue of injury-prone players and being tight.
Yeah, I think Miles Austin is in a very similar situation to Denarius Moore. Austin's got a little bit longer track record. Romo, in my estimation, in that offense is a little bit better situation than what Denarius Moore's in. Might be a little bit, he's certainly higher in my tiers, Austin is, than Moore. I'm a little bit more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, although Austin's a guy that's had a number of hamstring issues as well. So, if you're nervous about that, don't feel bad about dropping him down your tiers. But I think that situation is solid enough, especially with Witten missing in the beginning there, that it's all right to give him the benefit of the doubt. Roy Halou, I might be forthcoming about some Achilles tendonitis issues as well if I watch Devin Royster, Alfred Morris, and the rest of the chain gang being moved ahead of me on the depth chart. So maybe there's a little bit of gamesmanship on his part there. I doubt that, but who knows? Roy Halou, the Achilles tendonitis is something that he's had an issue with in the past. Some players, we've seen Jonathan Stewart struggle with that and be effective at times, although not able to carry a full load. We've seen other players like LaRon Landry not be able to handle it at all and miss extended period of time. These are overuse injuries, so it's rest, it's anti-inflammatories, it's time. And there's really no timetable to know, especially if we don't know how severe this particular episode of inflammation is, whether it's associated with bone spurs or little micro tears or anything like that. There's no timetable to say, yeah, it's just going to take a week to cool off and he'll be good to go without any additional setbacks. It's a lot like Antonio Gates last year, where I think until we see him moving as he was before for a longer period of time without any concerns that there's something coming back, you consider him snap to snap, day to day, instead of week to week. And there's enough going on that depth chart. I've been saying this for months. I know guys like Roy Halou are attractive because he's got some talent and it's a good system, but there's just no reason to be messing around with this backfield where these guys' ADP are right now. And now with the overuse issue, the Achilles tendonitis, the risk of up and down injury issues on top of the up and down depth chart issues, on top of the up and down what's going on in this particular series issues, he would have to fall very far past his current ADP for me to consider him. Now, the injury-prone issue, I've been brainstorming about this for the better part of a week for a coming post on the Second Opinion blog, if I can get my thoughts straight here. There's just a whole lot of things that we can talk about here. Tightness, naturally tight, I assume that means that, he's not as flexible as other players. But, both sides of that coin could make a player, quote-unquote, injury-prone. If you're too tight, your body isn't as flexible, and you may be a little bit more likely to have muscle strains than otherwise. If your joints or your tendons are a little bit too loose and there's some laxity there, you may have a little bit more likelihood of having joint sprains or even muscle strains from that standpoint as well. But I think the key thing for me is the injury-prone label is a tough sell for me because it's a retroactive thing. We're basing it on what has gone on in the past, and certainly there's no denying that there's a subset of players that for whatever reason seem to be prone to injury. Whether that, it's a semantic issue, but the injury-prone label just bothers me because I don't know that you can reliably say that every one of these past injuries has something to do with his genetic makeup, his conditioning, his ability, his reaction time, any of those things. Every single one of those injuries has so much to do with that he's X% more likely than his teammate to have this particular injury or another particular injury over time. And that injury-prone label gets applied to the wrong people. You know, we've talked about DeMarco Murray being called injury-prone because he broke his leg. That doesn't work that way, for me anyway. So, you know, hopefully we'll have a little bit more, you know, from top to bottom thoughts about that in a post coming up. Halou, you know, the tightness, a player that says that, I think there's reason for concern there. But, you know, he's not a guy that, other than this, you know, recurrent Achilles issue there, necessarily was labeled with muscle strains and that sort of stuff in the past, to my knowledge anyway. So, you know, I'd be careful about using those things. And when you do, think of it as a prospective or a forward-thinking thing rather than applying it generically to anybody that's had a recent injury.
The wisdom from the doctor. And, you know, this is why you listen to the show. This is why you go to the Second Opinion blog, why you follow him on Twitter. And you always bring the hard-hitting takes. And we always love talking to you, Doc. So, you know, we look forward to being with you on the IDP show. And, of course, always look forward to our hijinks on Twitter.
Twitter hijinks are always good. Roundtable hijinks are always good. Looking forward to it. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks.
Yes, the doctor. And, of course, also chat room hijinks coming up as we get into the second hour. And hopefully we may be joined by Cecil Lammey. And whether or not we are at some point, Matt and I are going to jump into these questions from the Shark Pool. Lots of questions, lots of stuff on your mind, lots of ins, lots of outs. And Ryan Matthews now is saying he has no doubt he'll play in week 1. So the plot thickens. But I think that Gene actually had some really good wisdom on that Ryan Matthews issue. And, you know, it's something that we see a lot in fantasy football and life in general. You know, you're going to basically dig your heels in further, however your stance was. If you just weren't going to go near Ryan Matthews, now you're really not going to go near him. And if you liked him, you're going to find a reason to take him maybe now in the late second. I don't know. But very interesting stuff here. Very interesting stuff on everyone's mind as we are getting close to the height of draft season, getting close to the dress rehearsal, week 3 of the preseason. Lots of good stuff. And this is a good question right off the bat, Matt, from Mr. Deltoid. And, you know, I've been trying to prepare an article about this, but you know, this is one of those questions that I really don't have a clear, yes, I lack clarity. There you go, poor shot for that one. But this is a tough question, and Mr. Deltoid's specific league is a 16-team league, and also it only starts one running back. It's very much like the IOP format that we've been doing, and that makes it easier. Also, return yards are counted, so wide receivers have a bigger pool. And he's saying, you know, even though there's been a lot of people saying running back in a league like this, he's also drafting late 15th out of 16th, taking a top 4 quarterback, a superstar tight end. I think especially the 16-team league stretching out that value makes it important because picking near the turn, you may get caught on the wrong side of a run. So absolutely, 15th pick, 18th pick is a great spot to maybe land a Drew Brees if you're lucky, a Tom Brady. But the question here, the bigger question, Matt, this is a question that all of us are facing, and I know that this is one that you have to be on the clock, you know, and decide in that moment on the clock. But where's the break point in the first round for you when you deviate from the running backs and go for, and we love Tom Brady, you know, or Tom Brady doesn't have to necessarily even be Tom Brady. Maybe Tom Brady's gone and the next guy up, Calvin Johnson, the next guy up, Jimmy Graham. The big question here is, going away from the running back position in the first round, what does it take, at least to your best estimation, for that to happen for you right now?
I think that when I look at leagues right now that I'm drafting in, I feel like that there's quality depth falling to the second and third rounds at the running back position, mainly because people are like overreacting to the idea that there's, you know, that there's not enough depth at running back, you know, and you need to take some. But what's interesting is that I'm seeing, at least in the leagues that are similar to like ours, like this one here, I'm seeing guys, because of the injury and the potential for suspension, when you look at Marshawn Lynch, you know, the things that are looming there, or backfield situations that aren't quite cleared up the way that we wanted them to. Doug Martin possibly being the starter, but LeGarrette Blount playing well enough that it's still kind of lingering there that he could do that, or that C.J. Spiller coming on and Fred Jackson being older. There's still enough questions there that I look at it and I think that probably after the fifth back, whoever your fifth back is, that's when I start looking at quarterbacks and wide receivers. And I think that Bloom, and even I've talked about it, but I think Bloom's really carried the torch here for us about how running back is, a position that doesn't have a lot of depth right now. So, make sure you try and get what you can early on. And I would offer a corollary just kind of something for argument, which is the whole point of injury. And I know that Gene just got up there and said, well, you can't say somebody's injury prone, but I would say that the running back position, I would believe, has a pretty good track record of starters getting hurt at some point in the year and missing the season. So if you draft running backs in bulk in the mid to late rounds, you're bound to hit on somebody. So if you get one, that's great. In the first 3 to 4 rounds, you get one that you can feel like you can rely on, great. But if you pick in bulk in the mid to late rounds, it could work out for you, especially if you're going to get the chance to pick, Brady Breeze, Jimmy Graham, Gronkowski, Gates. And to me, at the end of the first round, to be able to have that chance to do that, know that you're going to have a guy that's probably going to have that points advantage at that position, and maybe even a points advantage over wide receiver twos, maybe even some running back twos, depending on the type of league you're in. Why not go for that player, especially if you do take the approach of going in bulk? I mean, good example, Bloom's talking Shane Vereen. He was certainly on my list of guys I was thinking about for our IDP draft, but to get Shane Vereen in the 15th round, and he could possibly turn out to be just a contributor that I can use as a committee starter, even if he's my second running back on a bye week where I know he's going to get me points. That's nice value in a league where I only have to start one running back and have the flex of 3 starting caliber receivers and 2 tight ends in leagues like this. If you have, for me, I'm looking at my team and I have, Aaron Hernandez, Jordy Nelson, Brandon Lloyd, and then someone like Reggie Wayne. Well, why would I start 2 running backs in a league that's going to reward receivers for points per reception? And if these guys play like they did last year or a little better in, say, Wayne's case or in Hernandez's case, I'm only going to need one back. And a lot of people have these types of leagues, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think that the theme is you can be flexible, stay nimble, and I still think 2 running backs in the first 3 picks. You got to do that. But the first round doesn't have to be a running back, especially if you can get that Tom Brady or Jimmy Graham or Aaron Rodgers or Rob Gronkowski, and yes, even Calvin Johnson, although I don't like taking a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds just because of the depth. But especially if you're picking in the mid-first, then you're going to get in the second round. I still think Darren Sproles in PPR leagues a terrific value in the second round, and even Marshawn Lynch at this point I think is a value in the second round. I would put it under 10%, maybe under 5% that he suspended this year. So you're getting tremendous value. And if there was no question hanging over Lynch at all, I would probably have him as my number 5 running back right now, ahead of Darren McFadden. So you've got value there. You've got value with Fred Jackson, I think. Honestly, some of the other values we're seeing emerge, as we've been talking about, Kevin Smith, Peyton Hillis, taking these shots on guys like Shane Vereen or Evan Royster later on. You may need to take them around before ADP, but to your team, if you are trying to fill that one spot at running back, or maybe you want to build some potential depth, it's worth it. So I think that going non-running back in the first round sometimes it's going to be the smart play. And really, like I said, you're going to have to wait until you're on the clock sometimes to know what you're going to do. Gunslinger Ender has a question. This is another good question about draft approach, and it kind of goes opposite of the be flexible, but I also think that this is a fun time of year to talk about what I like to call reserve a blank round pick for blank. And I think, Matt, you and I would probably see eye to eye on one of these, because he starts out with a note of flexibility. Starting, he's had success with upside down drafting. He's had success with standard running back drafting. Now he's thinking about just having 3 must-haves and then filling the rest with value. I think this is a good modified approach where you have some rigid ideas because based on ADP and based on your evaluation on a player, you just reserve that pick. You don't get cute with it. The worst thing is missing out on a player. He says Gates and Donald Brown and Peyton Hillis. I could see Gates in the 4th round for sure as a player who could produce 80-90% of Gronkowski and Graham and be a value there. Donald Brown, I'm going to diverge and say I don't like Donald Brown anywhere in the first 10 rounds, but I do like the idea of reserving a 7th round pick for Peyton Hillis. And again, this is one where, even if you only get one running back out of the first 3 rounds, you can get Peyton Hillis and maybe take him in the 6th just to make sure you get him, because then you have Calvin Johnson or Julio Jones or someone like that bolstering your wide receivers, so that 6th round wide receiver you miss on, it's okay. Peyton Hillis is your running back 2 for week 1. You know what? I don't think that's a terrible starting lineup. I think Peyton Hillis is going to be tremendous value there. I know another one, Matt, where you and I would see eye to eye on is Brandon Lloyd in the 4th round. And I'm seeing it consistently, like you said, as long as we aren't in a trap with each other, Matt, Brandon Lloyd's there in the 4th round. And if I was staying true to my cheat sheets, I'd probably be taking Lloyd in the 3rd round consistently. I just know that he can go in the 6th round, and I can tell you if you're drafting in RT Sports, I think his rank is still something like 74. And yes, this is another variable that we have to take into account, by the way. Your league software is going to have some sort of standard ranking, and there are going to be people in your league that are going to look at that ranking, and it may influence them. You need to know, whether it's MFL or ESPN or Yahoo or whatever, the ranking behind the scenes that they're going to be looking at, and it may give you a heads up to take a player around earlier than you might, or let them fall around later than you might. And I think if you're drafting RT Sports, Brandon Lloyd is a player you may even be able to get away with in the 5th or even 6th. What do you think about this approach that Gunslinger Ender brings up? Basically going into a draft saying, I'm flexible, but I know in this round I'm taking this player.
Yeah, I think that we all have that with certain players, and it's just kind of human nature that we kind of do that in the back of our minds. That there's some guys that's like, if they're there, they're gone for me. Hillis I took in the 8th round in our IDP league, so I'm right there with you on that. I would agree, Donald Brown. I'd like to wait a little bit longer. If he drops far enough, I'll take him, but he's not a must-have for me. As much as there's things about him that I really like, I'm still a little skeptical. Just enough, not where he's not quite a must-have, more as a guy that I definitely want though. Reggie Wayne to me, the fact that he's dropping as far as he is in drafts right now, he's a guy that's a must-have as my wide receiver 3. The fact that I can have him that late as a 6th round pick, to me, that's just too good to be true. Even at his age, he's being moved around a lot, going to be used in the slot. And when Reggie Wayne says, well, better late than never, that my 12th year I'm going to get moved around to do things that I've been able to do all my career, which is kind of a little bit of a stab at Tom Moore's offensive agenda, which is fascinating, because if you think about the Colts, they had the most simplistic offense under Peyton Manning, which is the craziest thing when you think about all the complexity that you think you're seeing out on the field, when really it is we're going to run this play, we're going to dare you to beat us because we're so precise. And that's what's amazing. That was amazing about them. So if they're going to be able to move around and take advantage of luck, being able to adjust, at the young age that he's at to do these things, and it works out, he's an incredible bargain. On the defensive side of the football, I've been targeting Carlos Dansby as my second linebacker when I've had a chance to get him. It hasn't always worked out that way because I've had other people in leagues, especially in some of our writers' leagues and quote experts drafts, who have the same idea of Carlos Dansby's going to bounce back. Last year Greg Cosell pretty much skewered him in some of his write-ups, saying that he just wasn't very good last year, and we come to find out that he wasn't in shape. He was overweight. Went to a dietitian or a nutritionist and changed his whole eating habits, lost weight, and now he's playing middle linebacker for the Dolphins, and this is going to be, I think this could be a banner year for Dansby, who to me, talent-wise, is really one of the most talented linebackers in the league, and as a veteran, that's, it's a wonderful thing to have somebody like that. So, I mean, those are three guys right there that I look at and feel like they're must-haves, right there.
Lord Fantasy wanted to know if it's too early for Fantasy Court, and it's not. And if you have Fantasy Court type questions, disputes that we can solve for you, give some insight, then please send them in, because it isn't just lineups or waiver wire. You can have draft disputes too. So absolutely, we like to be that impartial voice for you, and really bring some common sense to a situation that is often one that's charged with emotion when it happens within a league. End Business has a question about Matt Flynn and Russell Wilson, and anytime I hear Russell Wilson, Matt, I always want you to weigh in, because it's really funny now, and I don't want to sound too negative here, but it is funny to hear now everybody saying, who cares about height? He can overcome the height. He can be a starting quarterback. Maybe there are a few people saying that, including John Snyder and Pete Carroll for the draft, but Matt Waldman was one of the people saying that before the draft. And Matt Waldman, I want to know what you think about this idea that he says Flynn plays steadily for the next couple of years, and then Russell Wilson is kind of a Michael Turner guy waiting in the wings. He says he doesn't seem relevant for a while. I'm going to jump in right away and say, look, Pete Carroll doesn't care where someone was drafted. He doesn't care what someone gets paid. He's going to play his best players, whoever he thinks they are. So I would not be so sure that Russell doesn't make the field. But the next question, Matt, since you studied Russell very well, is let's say we find out Russell is the week one starter, or he takes over at some point in the regular season. Can he have fantasy relevance this year?
Yeah, I think Russell Wilson absolutely can have fantasy relevance this year, mainly because what he does so well is he is able to read the field extremely well, and he's mobile. So when you put those two things together, you have a player who improvises well and throws players open. When you have those skills, those are the best skill sets to have for a young quarterback who may make mistakes, because he's going to be able to work his way out of it. Look at Brett Favre early in his career, where he had success as a rookie in his first couple of years. Yeah, he was always been an interception machine, and he made lots of boneheaded errors. But the common thing with him is that he had a great arm, great mobility, great improvisational skills, and he was a good leader, at least in the huddle. And you look at that, and you even look at Derek Anderson in Cleveland. Great arm, good mobility, and he had a player that he could throw the ball up to in Braylon Edwards, and had a decent running game to where he also had success early on. Cam Newton, great arm, great mobility, great leadership, good improvisational skills. Russell Wilson isn't any different there. When you look at this is a situation primed where Wilson could do extremely well, and he could be someone that, when I say extremely well, I'm not saying Cam Newton numbers. I'm not even going to say Derek Anderson numbers when he was in Cleveland. But I do think that he could be a 15th, 16th ranked fantasy quarterback with some starter caliber weeks for this team, because of the fact that what he does well. And you can find that. You can go to Football Outsiders, look for the article called Studying the Asterisk, and that's where I basically profile Wilson and show how in two different offensive systems he could read the blitz, throw people open, throw on the move, make plays with his feet, and they were all things you saw this weekend against the Titans in the second half of the game. And that's the thing. When you look at Matt Flynn can move around, but he doesn't have quite the arm that Wilson does, and he's not quite the improviser that Wilson is. He has moments, but I think the answer here, just my opinion in business, is that it's not the most likely scenario that Flynn plays steady for the next couple of years. It's if Flynn plays steady for the next couple of years, because all his career he has been mighty inconsistent. At LSU, even early on with Green Bay, he hasn't had a lot of opportunities, but he hasn't exactly lit the world on fire either. He had that great game against the Packers in terms of the Patriots, which was a nice effort there. But I look at Flynn, and he's the most likely candidate to be the next Kevin Kolb. The good team, good record of quarterback depth chart, gets the free agent contract after manning the ship pretty well when the starter goes down, and he basically got that contract on one game, and that's always a dangerous proposition. And so looking at that, to me, that's a big reason why they hedged their bet and looked at Russell Wilson, in addition to the fact that they know that they got a steal in terms of talent level in the third round.
Yeah, exactly, and you've got to keep that in mind, that if they're taking Russell Wilson in the third round, mid-third round, that means he's a top 50 player on their board. That means that it may be even higher than that, where they just thought, we cannot pass on the opportunity to get a starting quarterback in the third round of the draft. Doesn't matter how good our quarterback situation is. Any team that would pass on that possibility when they have scouted a player and decided that's what he's worth would just be silly. So this Russell Wilson story continues to develop. I love these kind of questions we get from Gray One, and he expresses the same feeling I have, which is hating roster limits. Look, let's soapbox this for 1 second. The whole point of being a fantasy football GM is that you get to decide the composition of your roster, the deployment of your resources. If you want to carry 10 wide receivers, then you can carry 10. Use your roster spots however you want. So these leagues that have a roster limit in the draft of 4 running backs and 4 wide receivers, I think it's bunk. I would lobby very hard and try to get your league together to change that before the draft. But if you are stuck and you cannot change it, Matt, how does it change your draft strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because you're looking at this, and if you have to remember that basically what these draft strategies are set, or these roster limits do, is it encourages the waiver wire, makes it more important because of the fact that you're not going to be able to stockpile positions. So at this point, you're looking at the scoring rules. Which position is going to be more beneficial? If you have no flex and it's just 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers as starts, then what that means to you is that running backs have more value. That's just basically how it's going to be. So you're going to want to probably draft running backs early and often there and get the best caliber backs you can get, early on, get your first 4 off the board. But if you find that, there's a kind of a corollary to that too. If you find that everyone is doing that, because of the fact that this whole system encourages waiver wire picks, because you only have maximums here, it actually, the thing is option 1 is running backs, but option 2 is if everyone else is taking running backs early because of that, then you be flexible to take the best player available, not worry about, when you take a certain position, and know that you can rely on the waiver wire to do justice for you, and just monitor that well. Stay tuned to us at Football Guys, where, Bloom and I are going to certainly, do our due diligence to recommend guys for you during the season that you can pick up. And if you blew it on your first 2 backs, hopefully we'll be able to save you down the line.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, one of the things I would want to know is, are these draft limits only, or are the roster limits held throughout the season? Because if the roster limits are held throughout the season, I would almost say you want to take 3 early, and then of both running back and wide receiver, and then take your quarterbacks and tight ends, and have that 4th one be a flyer, be somebody that you won't necessarily have remorse about cutting for the hot running back or wide receiver on that that's what I'll call fat waiver wire, because if it's 4 for the entire year, you're going to have to drop somebody to pick up somebody, and believe me, there are going to be guys you're going to want to pick up. Now, if it's no roster limits once the season actually starts, then I would say you want to get 4 picks early. You want to get probably, I wouldn't even say it would be that crazy, depending on the quarterback scoring and whether it's a tight end premium, to have your first 8 picks be all running backs and wide receivers, and then you just take all kinds of shots at tight ends and quarterbacks after that, because after the season starts, you can start getting those flyers at running back and wide receiver. So that's another variable there. But the important thing is, and this is one of those things kind of like eat your vegetables, know your scoring system, know your rules, know your lineup. Because, Matt, you and I are doing drafts right now with experts, with other people that we work with in the industry, and sometimes you have to ask whether everybody is really doing that. And these are the people who other people are asking for advice. So more than anything, knowing your rules, knowing the ins and outs, asking questions of your commissioner if you have to, is the most important thing. It's just fundamentals. Childress has a question about the Steelers running backs. Now, Gina's already covered that. And I'm just going to touch on this one really quickly because we're going to be giving us a lot of coverage over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to say this. Dwyer at this point moved down to Redmond moved down to about the 7th or 8th round. At this point, I would probably even take a Kevin Smith ahead of him until we know more. But Dwyer's still a 15th or 16th round guy just because he's not going to necessarily take this job and run with it. He's still somebody who you're hoping for flex value from, basically. Baron Batch is still there. Chris Rainey is still there. Really, it's just the Steelers are turning into a team kind of like Green Bay or New England or, Indy, I think, is another team like this year where you're not going to have necessarily a clear lead back if it keeps going this way. That's my take right now. Matt, just real quick, how are you approaching the Steelers running backs right now?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I've dropped Redmond and I've given Dwyer a bump, but not enough of a bump where I'm sitting here taking him a priority over Kevin Smith for sure. I think I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's a lot like the Rashad Jennings situation. I think that Dwyer, talent-wise, is almost as capable as Jennings. But I think that it's a matter of, fit situation, what this team wants to do, and I just don't think it's as good of a situation as what actually Jacksonville would be for a running back in terms of being the bell cow back. After the 12th, 13th round, I feel that's where I would be looking at Dwyer, depending on the league.
Now, the next question from Colin Coyote is a very specific question, but I think it's a good one to frame an important player, depending on the spot you draw in the first round, to have clarity on. And Colin Coyote has the 6th pick, 12 teams, PPR, 6 point per passing touchdown. This also touches on our earlier discussion of running back or non-running back in the first round. 6th pick. Because of 6 points for passing touchdown, he thinks Brady, Rogers gone, Rice, Foster, McCoy gone. Loves Calvin Johnson, but he doesn't want to go receiver that early. So then he's thinking about Brees, Stafford, McFadden, Murray, Graham. Now, he does not mention Chris Johnson. That's my pick right here. I'm going to make my case for him, but Matt, you can feel free to punch a bunch of holes in it, and you can say, no, this is actually the right call. I think it's Chris Johnson simply because of this. As terrible as Chris Johnson was last year, he was still the number 9 running back in PPR leagues. That's his floor. Now, with this Chris Palmer offense, more run-and-shoot concepts, more wide-open offense, Jake Locker, we haven't got a chance to talk about Jake Locker yet, but basically the job's his. He has to implode at this point. That's what they're telling you through between the lines for it not to be his. And this is another reason, by the way, I think you can get cute at quarterback and wait, because Jake Locker's there for you after the 12th round. Just another guy who can finish in the top 10 who you can get in the second half of your draft. Let's get back on the topic at hand here, which is Chris Johnson at the 6th pick. Am I leading Colin Coyote into certain disaster, or do you think maybe he is worth trust that high coming off a season that oftentimes he looks like doo-doo?
Chris Johnson is the player that I was asked on Twitter last week, who's the player I'm most scared to take in the first round, who I just hope that they get drafted before I get a chance to have to make that decision, and Chris Johnson is that guy for me. But here's the thing. the argument you make is quite compelling. And the fact of the matter is that he is in better shape. Yeah, he didn't look great against a good Seahawks defense in the preseason, and it is just the preseason right now. And if I were going to look at other players, I mean, certainly you've got McFadden and Murray there. I like Murray a little bit better as a player than Johnson right now because of what I saw last year with both of these guys. But it's very close, and you have to remember that the Cowboys are struggling up front right now. Their guards are in some trouble. And so, to me, I don't know if this is going to be a great situation for Murray. You think, though, that even like a guard off the street is going to be able to run block. It's the passing game that's going to be an issue. But if opposing defenses know this, then they're gonna stuff the box, early on known running situations, study the tendencies, and if these injuries and the play continues to be troublesome for the Cowboys, by week 5, week 6, with the type of scouting that's done in the NFL, Murray could start to slump a little bit. A lot of what ifs there. He's still a guy I'm going to want to take in the late first, early second round in a lot of leagues. But I can see why Chris Johnson would be that pick, because when you look at Breeze and Stafford, certainly those are guys that are very appealing. Also in probably to me in the late first round, and if they're appealing in the late first round or mid even in this league, that means that Cam Newton is still probably going to be around. Tony Romo, even though we're talking about the offensive line, still a guy with a lot of good weapons there. But, I mean, to me, if Cam Newton comes back to you, and even though they're going to run the ball a lot in Carolina, with those 3 backs that they have, and Stewart, D'Angelo Williams, and Mike Tolbert, there's going to be some awfully simple, bare-bones defensive coverages for Cam Newton to just torch people. And, but by the way, he's still probably going to get, 6 to 8 rushing touchdowns in goal line situations, and might be the best, red zone running back that they have still. So to me, there's still a little bit of depth at the quarterback position, not to mention, one Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin
right.
and Jay Cutler, who you're going to be able to get well after round 4 or 5, even in a 6-point per touchdown league for passing. So, yeah, I can see Chris Johnson being a compelling argument there.
Okay, so I hate to do this to you, Matt, but if you're Colin Coyote, it's your pick, would you do it? I mean, simulating it, because it's impossible to know until you're really there. But would Chris Johnson be the pick, or would you just feel like at that last second you wouldn't be able to do, your heart just wouldn't be in it?
I'm just going to tell you right now, Colin. I told you he's the scariest pick that I've had that I have to deal with. So the answer would be no. And you guys know I like to take risks, and it'll probably be the risk that I should have taken because I'm a Titans fan, and I love what Chris Johnson can do. But until I continue to see more along what's going on with that offensive line, I'm honestly chicken about that one.
No, that's fair. And look, let's not act like this is some sort of cold calculating thing where we're like computers running software whenever we do our draft. And if that's how fantasy football is for you, honestly, I kind of feel sorry for you, because I think you're missing out on an entire, like you're living in a 2-dimensional world and there's a 3-dimensional world the rest of us are in. There are gut feelings, there is intuition, and there is just when it comes right down to it. I know that I've talked myself into negotiating trades, and when the moment comes to accept the trade, I just can't do it. I can't articulate why, but you have a deeper knowledge in you, what I would call intuition, that it is with you. And sadly, in fantasy football, and Matt, I know you're going to nod whenever I say this, sadly that clarity sometimes only comes after the moment of action. It's only at the moment that you accept the trade, or at the moment that the 12 o'clock games, I'm in Central Time Zone, start, and you realize you started the wrong player. You can stare at it 20 times leading up to the game, and you have the right player, so you think in, and as soon as the game starts and you actually have no recourse, then you realize how wrong you were. The point is, letting yourself be swayed by those things, just not being able to take Chris Johnson, that's as good an argument as far as I'm concerned as any. And we can get into all of the analysis, But if you're not going on that gut feeling, on that intuition, then it's not really your team. You know, you're letting other people make the decisions for you. So not to get into a more philosophical discussion, but I think all of these things intersect in fantasy football. It's one of the things that I love about it. Now, Badgers fan, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
It's funny, Bloom, because I do have to tell everybody who's listening here that I was nodding my head when Bloom said that, and ironically enough, usually where I get in the most trouble is after I've already established my opinions. I've got my gut feelings in terms of backing up how I feel about one thing or another and what I've been reading and keeping track of and projecting. And then I'll do something stupid like read something that Bloom says that might counter it. And then it causes me to question what I'm doing, and then I'm at that one pick, and I don't even want to look for it. I'm like looking at my rankings, for instance, and I see Bloom's out there, and my eye just can't do anything but drift over there and see, oh yeah, he's got him a little bit higher than I do, because then I start playing that silly game of, well, is he going to pick him if I don't? You know, will I be able to get him here? You know, I mean, because certainly you and I had a couple of times. I know in this staff league, you've sniped a number of my picks, and then in this expert league that we've been doing today, I certainly got a couple on you, but it's been back and forth like that, and sometimes what happens that I've told myself after I've done this is that I'm not looking at anything more. I'm just getting my list. I'm just going with that. I've already put all my gut, feelings and what's going on with that. And I'm not listening to anybody. I'm not getting on Twitter. I'm not doing any of that stuff because I feel like the wind's going to blow and shake my faith in something, No,
it's true. It's true. And I'll tell you what, just on these little like war stories kind of vibe before we get into the quick hitters from Badgers fan, I play in it's going to be ridiculous this year. I'm probably going to eclipse 20 leagues this year that I'm going to be maintaining. I don't know. I'm the kind of person that has to push it past. You don't know where the limits are until you push it past the limit. But there are some leagues that I actually just check in maybe an hour before the waiver wire runs, just do quick glances at the free agents, make some quick estimate bids. The Sunday morning, I make sure my lineup's set. I guess this year it'll be Thursday night, and give it a minimal amount of maintenance, maybe toss out some quick trade offers, look at what's there. And mainly I'm making those, this is what you're describing as, just go off of your rankings and just make the picks you want to pick. Don't worry about it. Don't overanalyze it. Almost always, those are the leagues I do best in. Almost always. The leagues that I overanalyze are the leagues that I talk myself in and out of things to the point where I blow a microchip. So
exactly.
Interesting, larger philosophical issues here. Maybe there's some wisdom you can take, but let's talk about real fantasy football stuff again. Things that can help people more than Star Wars stories. And I love this quick hitter format, Matt. So let's do some quick hitters from Badgers fan. Quick over-unders. An over-under is a great way to frame a question. Just get right down to it, okay? Eric Decker, 85 catches.
About 10 under.
I'm going to say just slightly over, but most important thing here is value where he's going in PPR leagues. Peyton Hillis, 1,100 total yards, 8 touchdowns.
I think he's going to be under on the yards and over on the touchdowns.
I think that the yards will be over and the touchdowns will be over. Part of the analysis here is I like Kansas City this year, value. Doug Martin, 220 carries, 40 receptions.
Oh, I saw total. I thought it said rushing yards for Hillis. I agree, over and over. And for Martin, 220. Yes, I would agree that 220 carries. I'd agree with, and I would say probably 25 receptions.
Yeah, I agree with it. Splitting the difference here that maybe we should be not quite as excited about Martin as we were, but running back scarcity would say, even though we're saying, over on the carries, under on the receptions, still in the late third, you're thinking about him. Reggie Wayne, the answer here, Reggie Wayne, 80 receptions?
Slightly under. Just slightly.
There needed to be yardage there, because I know you would have come in over on yardage. Julio Jones, 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns, the man we started out with tonight.
Oh, man. I'm I'm going to say slightly over.
Yeah.
Slightly
Barring
over.
injury, if he doesn't miss time, I think that 1,210 are probably for him this year. This is an interesting one, and it goes to the point we were just making about quarterback depth. We were talking about young guys. How about an older guy? Carson Palmer, 3,999 passing yards, 24 touchdowns.
This is where I would have told you on point before the Dallas game, and then after watching all these guys drop passes, I'm starting to, but it is just the preseason. I'm gonna say it's on point. I think that's where he's going to be, around 4,000 yards, so slightly over, and on point with the touchdowns.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he could even approach 30 touchdowns, just because the guy's a gunslinger. He's about the 18th, 20th quarterback off the board, maybe 16th at the highest in some leagues. Give you an idea of quarterback value this year. Another running back who could bail you out in the third round. Another one to maybe be that second running back when you take two out of the first three rounds. And this is one where Dr. Gene has been fighting a good fight from the fort. I've been the one maybe slinging arrows at the fort, but maybe I'm going to ask to get in the fort here on Ahmad Bradshaw. And the question here is 10 touchdowns.
I think that's too high. I love Ahmad Bradshaw, but that's too high for me. And it has nothing to do with the running backs. I think it just has to do with basically this offense. I think it's going to be somewhere in the 7 to 8 range.
And I could see that, especially if Bradshaw's feet and ankles don't hold up. Although I'm starting to wonder about David Wilson and how big of a role he's going to play this year. Not a huge fan of DJ Ware. Starting to think that Ahmad Bradshaw may be closer to lead back, at least until he breaks down, than I was giving him credit for, just by necessity. So I'm going to say over on that one. This one's a resounding over from both of us. So instead of asking if we're going to see over 9 touchdowns from Brandon Lloyd, maybe for the first half of the year, that's the over and under for him. Give me your, just off the top of your head, estimation of the number of touchdowns he'll get this year.
16.
Yeah, 15 is the number in my head. So there you go. You're not going to find any reason to not take Brandon Lloyd in the fourth round on this show. So this is a bigger question from Alexander Supertramp 215. He was asking for the top 15 running backs that are in their rookies or second year based on talent, upside, and situation. We're not going to get into that time-consuming of a response, although we have dynasty rankings up at Football Guys, and certainly you could ask about any specific guys you're wondering about. But I'll put it to you this way, Matt. As we're scrambling around in dynasty leagues, we're getting our team ready to make a title run this year. This could also be a good time to get that first or second year running back. He brought up LaShore, assumption that all are healthy and not suspended. LaShore falls into this range. Ryan Williams, Shane Vereen, we've been talking about. Mark Ingram, of course, the entire rookie class. Let me ask you this. Is there a running back right now, a young running back, who maybe still is not on the verge of playing a big role for your fantasy team, to Quiz Rogers, that you are thinking this is a good time to steal him in a dynasty trade when he doesn't seem like an essential piece, because in a year, or maybe by the end of this year, he will be?
Well, I thought Bilal Powell was that guy, and I still think he is that guy. And I made a trade where I gave up DeLon Carter and a pick for Bilal Powell in one of our dynasty leagues. So yeah. I think that he's probably that guy for me right now. And then let's talk about a couple of just lesser guys that aren't even going to probably do anything this year, but if they get a chance to compete, they would be interesting. I mean, I think Kendall Hunter is another one that you could put in there. And then I would add as a late guy, Johnny White, who's been a favorite of this show. He continues to look good when he gets playing time in Buffalo. And, if Fred Jackson moves on, and then you have, C.J. Spiller, who, could be a Reggie Bush-like player, you just never know. And then the third player, Daniel Thomas, who's also probably more up there with Powell and folks. I really considered him just recently in a draft, but just didn't pull the trigger on him. I've been reading that he's He got the same nutritionist as Carlos Dansby. Reggie Bush is saying he looks quicker and stronger. They're playing that zone blocking system, which was similar to what he did at Kansas. So you got to like all that. And the point that you made earlier about Ahmad Bradshaw and David Wilson, just to update that, I just read a report, from SB Nation saying that it was mentioned in practice today that there's some whispers that David Wilson's having trouble picking up the playbook, and that's also another reason for DJ Ware.
Yeah, and this is a great moment to talk about this issue of, you're kind of at a crossroads with these young backs, and this is, you may not know it at the moment, but this is a buy low or sell high moment for a lot of these guys because we feel like we know the book on them. Bilal Powell's a great example, and people are catching up on him because he just was so unimpressive against Denver last year. But he has obviously been impressing the Jets, and we all know what Sean Green can and can't do. So, this is just one of those, putting it all together, like whatever is it, Colonel Mustard with the candlestick in the study, Bilal Powell with being competent in training camp in the backfield. But just real quick on that same note, is this a time, you alluded to this with C.J. Spiller, and it's something I want to bring up because it's something that's been on my mind too. There's an assumption, I think, that C.J. Spiller, just based on how high he's going in drafts right now and just the buzz around him, that, he's the next man up in Buffalo whenever that happens. Do you think this might be a good time to trade C.J. Spiller in Dynasty Leagues because the expectations, maybe you're getting too high?
Actually, that's a great idea when you look at it, because of the fact that if they do continue to go with the committee approach, you're going to get good value for him, and there's that risk. I mean, to me, it's kind of like if you honestly see C.J. Spiller as Reggie Bush, and I'm not talking Reggie Bush last year, but maybe Reggie Bush when he had a good season with the Saints, or his first year with the Saints, where he had some nice moments, or when you combine the good moments together, I would say that even now people are wondering if Reggie Bush is going to be the guy, and I see so many people rank Reggie Bush as a guy that's going to be that 12th, 13th, 14th back, maybe even the 10th ranked back like he was last year. But when it comes time to pick him at that spot, people are just hesitating to pull the trigger. I mean, left and right, and I've been one of them. I mean, so you look at that, and it's also because of the idea that they're going to throw a lot of the they're planning on running a lot of plays, and there's the talk of Lamar Miller and Daniel Thomas and folks like that. So if you see him as kind of that Reggie Bush guy, and that's how you view him, and you can be honest with yourself about that, yeah, trade him. Get some more value. You're going to get good value for him, and then pick a running back that you feel comfortable with in terms of their style, that they're more of a Steven Jackson type of guy, like Trent Richardson, Mark Ingram, players who can be the bell cow if they're given the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about Reggie Bush. It's just all the years that we have been let down by him that it just feels like I can't trust him. I can't trust him. M. Summer has a few things to talk about. Now, Dr. Gene talked about Ryan Matthews and Isaac Redmond tonight. We didn't talk about Ronnie Hillman, but look, this is kind of like Shane Vereen last year. It's just tough when you miss all of training camp basically with hamstring injuries to make a big contribution, at least early on. And I'm sure that Cecil, when he comes back next week, will weigh in on Ronnie Hillman. Also, Desmond Bishop, Pat Anger, tune into our IDP roundtable that came out last night on that. Quarterback battles, real quick. Jake Locker, the coach, has basically said, as long as he keeps playing the way he has been, he will have the job. I think he's got top 10, top 12 upside. He's a high upside backup quarterback can get after the 12th round. Like him a lot. I also like what he does for the prospects of everybody in that offense. Flynn and Wilson we've talked about. I think Flynn's still in the lead, but don't count Wilson out. And certainly don't count Wilson out if Flynn is, let's say, a little flaccid as the season starts. Cobb and Skelton. It's going to be Skelton by default. But let me ask you this, Matt. Is this making you a little more wary of Larry Fitzgerald this year?
No, I mean, I've kind of had a realistic expectation, I think, in my mind of Fitzgerald not being one of the top, not being one of the top 3 receivers, top 4, maybe even top 5 guys. So to me, he's a wide receiver 1, but he's the guy that's going to have, an even mix of, he's not going to have a lot of elite games in my mind. So to me, Skelton's not going to impact that too much. I think that it's going to be a situation where what you see is what you get with Fitzgerald, and that means that he's a low-end wide receiver 1. And I agree with you about Locker. I know I'm not going to get him in any league that I'm in with you.
We'll see. This is the game. The pot thickens. And he asked real quick about Edwards and Theo and how that affects Sidney Rice. No, I actually think Sidney Rice is one of those players maybe people are abandoning too quickly. I mean, yeah, injury prone, still young, still a great receiver. If I see him on the 10th round or later in my standard drafts, all offense kind of leagues, I'm taking him. He's Sidney Rice. And if he has Russell Wilson, a guy who will do some, daring do throws, make some things happen, let's see a little resurgence for Sidney Rice this year. So I definitely think Sidney Rice is worth drafting, and that he could easily break 4,600 if he stays healthy, which has been an issue. Before we go into this last 10 minutes here, I do want to remind you about the Football Guys Players Championship. And yes, you can be the one with the big $150,000 check. We're giving you everything you need here, and just your instincts to find this show in the Football Guys community, you want to stay with the Football Guys brand name that you trust with the Players Championship. $350 to enter, or 3 teams for $1,000. That $150,000 grand prize, you can win it, and it's all held in escrow. It's all guaranteed. You get the prizes by January 28th. 2013, before the Super Bowl, no worries. So look at it this way, $350, just the entertainment you're going to get following your team, building up to your draft over these next few months from that money alone will give you the return on investment, but you just might take on the big prize, and we'd love to hear about it. So the Football Guys Players Championship is something that should be on your mind. Snellman has a good one here, and, the legend grows after blooming Matthews and Lynch, who's next on my list. And I'll say the player... I've got to honestly answer the question. The running back that I've been moving up the most, well, Peyton Hillis is probably the one that I've just been pounding the table for, okay? But the running back that I've been moving up my ranks the most in the last week or so has been Kevin Smith. So, but Peyton Hillis, I would say if you're asking me who's the next running back to go down with the Bloom curse, it's probably Peyton Hillis. So, you can't make this stuff up. I have a counter indicator. Go ahead, Matt.
You guys need to stop asking him this, because these are players I like too. I mean, I just picked Hillis. I love Lynch, and of course I've been Matthews was my top back 2-3 years ago and with the RSP. So yeah, I don't know. This is getting a little bit crazy this year. I'm thinking that maybe I need to wait to hear all these guys that you like and not do any drafts until you've done listing all the guys you love.
Yeah, I'm seeing it. This is like the new best-selling fantasy football book. It's just like the Costanza Seinfeld episode, do the opposite. So, and it's not because I'm not, I honestly believe when I say these things, and I think that Lynch is going to come back around. I still think Lynch in the 3rd round, and I'm going to re-bloom Lynch here, that Lynch in the 3rd round is still one of the best things going at fantasy drafts right now. So I think that this is good stuff. Now, Mass Raider has a question about the Guppy leagues, and, it's tough to say without he knows his league better than we do. He was thinking about, he's talking about Sproles falling to the 3-4 turn, and, at that point I say, all bets are off. If you think your league will let Sproles fall to the 3rd round, then go for it. But certainly a Guppy league is a league where you might try something like some sort of crazy strategy like taking Graham and Gronkowski or going upside down or something like that. Real quick, Shaw Bucks has a question about wide receivers, and we've talked about Percy Harvin, talked about Miles Austin during Gene's segment. Colston has come up, and I think we all agree that, Colston's injury prone, but he's number 1 in New Orleans. All that stuff balances out his ADP. What about Torrey Smith? We haven't talked much about Torrey Smith, Matt, and I mean, as a Steelers fan, he left a little welt from the way he played against us late last year. Is Torrey Smith a player that we kind of lost in the shuffle, but He's probably going to be the number one in Baltimore. We know Joe Flacco can throw it country mile. He can run under it. Is this a player we'll look back on and think, he was sitting there for me in the 7th round? Why did I take him?
Absolutely, and he already has been, and I know it's going to happen because somebody like Hazley in one of our leagues, Jeff Hazley, one of our excellent football writers, is going to take him, and then I'm going to look at his team and I'm going to go, how on earth is he beating the tar out of us in this league? And it's going to be because he picked guys like Torrey Smith, just like Keith Overton, who is like the backbone of football guys. I mean, literally, he's like the shutdown corner or that safety who can roam the entire field and do everything. And then if you need to put him at wide receiver or running back, he could probably do that too. Yeah, Keith Overton's the type of guy that would pick Nate Washington, and you'd wonder. And I know we have a question about that later too. So when you look at those two guys, Torrey Smith can make plays after contact. Nate Washington can make plays after contact. Both can get deep. Sometimes they drop passes just enough that you kind of downgrade them, and then they have quarterbacks that you, at least in the past, that you'd wonder about a little bit. But they're too good to pass up. If they're there, that's one of those ones where you want to follow your sheet and not listen to that inner voice question too much if you've already rated them there.
Yeah, and he also brings up a question about Robert Griffin III demanding extra attention. And remember, we've talked about how that's going to open up that running game, but also that it leaves a lot of one-on-one coverage. Who's going to benefit from that? I think the answer is Pierre Garçon, and everything that we're hearing out of Washington is that Pierre Garçon is that favored receiver. I want to go back real quick. I forgot to talk about this, Matt, when you brought up Reggie Wayne, but I do want to say that we've already heard this out of Indy from some sources. When I talked to George Bremer tonight, the interview will come out tomorrow. I just asked him who is establishing the best chemistry with Andrew Luck. And by the way, he reinforced that, they are as impressed, and they were probably already before we were impressed with Andrew Luck. Very impressed with him there, inside and outside of the organization. He said Austin Collie. He said that Austin Collie, he doesn't know if it's a West Coast thing or what have you, but these guys have some sort of mind meld, some sort of telepathy going, and we know that Collie is a starting wide receiver. He's not just a slot receiver, he's an outside receiver. And here's the important thing that you need to know here, especially in PPR leagues. Austin Collie's ADP in a 12-team league is 13th round. I think you should just say, on that earlier topic of reserving picks, reserve a 10th or 11th round pick for Austin Collie. If he stays healthy, he's going to catch 80 or 90 balls. And also, Austin Collie is probably a good counter argument to my worries about Greg Jennings. I'm making the ultimate Green Bay receiver, Greg Nelson and Jordy Jennings. Remember when Austin Collie had scary concussions and we were worried about him ever playing again? Now he's a great sleeper. So there you go. That's why I just bloomed right now is Austin Collie. But I did want to bring that up to give you the drop before that interview comes out tomorrow and just reinforce for you that Austin Collie, we're hearing from sources that are there every day in training camp, that the chemistry is there between those two guys. Cypher Chris, also known as Something About Football in the chat room, one of our favorite and most loyal chat room members on Thursday nights, has a question about keepers. Says, is Roy Lee worth an 8th round keeper at this point? And if not, should he take Greg Little or Denarius Moore? And we've had two of these three guys come up. We've got to watch Greg Little. He had one bad drop tonight when I was watching. So which direction do we go here? Do we just rule Halou out at this point and say it has to be a wide receiver? And if so, which one?
Yeah, I think you do rule Halou out. And I think that you can make a compelling upside argument for Denarius Moore because of his great downfield ability and the fact that he can make these huge plays in traffic. And I love that about him. I think that he has that potential to be a dynamic downfield threat and player after the catch. But honestly, I'm going Greg Little because I'd rather have that guy who's going to get reception after reception, make the tough yards. Yeah, he's going to drop some here and there. He's kind of more like T.O. as opposed to Denarius Moore's style of, Randy Moss. But in this case, go with the T.O. and go with Greg Little. And he's worked hard, and he's shown up in camp and done well. And again, you got to remember, former running back who's still learning the game at wide receiver. He's a fantastic player in terms of being a prospect, so I'd go with him.
Now we've got just 2 minutes left, so I'm not going to go to the questions any longer. And we appreciate all the questions. I'm going to go ahead and try to answer in the thread some of the specific questions you asked, because we appreciate it. We appreciate all the participation. We appreciate the community. You make us what we are. And we feed off of all of your positive energy, all of your love for football, for this game, just for the interaction. We can't get enough of it. So we appreciate that every week. And just, these questions bring up such great issues that affect all of our teams and drafts that I feel like they deserve a little more in-depth feeling. So, my overall feeling right now is just enjoy it. Enjoy it, folks. Because this is the good stuff. This is, I'm calling it the finger in the light socket feeling. We're all super energized, and there's things coming in from every angle. But Matt, talk about the experience right now as fantasy football season is really getting ramped up.
Yeah, this is the time where it's just great because you're getting a chance to watch such a wide spectrum of stuff going on, monitoring the practices, seeing the preseason games, even where you're seeing guys that that if you're a hardcore dynasty leaguer, that you're going to get a chance to get a glimpse of what possibly they can be physically. And then just all the news, dissecting everything and making trades and making, wheeling and dealing already and looking at it's all filled with possibility. And I think that's what makes it the best time of year because of all the possibilities of what could be and who you could end up with. And I think that's why the draft is probably the most enjoyable part of fantasy football.
Yeah, it's Christmas Eve, and we like opening our presents, but we like looking forward to opening our presents. So
enjoy that, folks.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.